This time, we're dealing with a line graph, and we want to see how we're going to answer the planning questions and also how we can understand the chart. I'm going to walk you through it. So basically what I'm doing is I'm thinking out loud, and this is what should be going through your head as you read the question and decide on the important stuff in preparation for your response. So I'm going to read the task one more time, even though we've read it before. The line graph below shows the number of students enrolled in 4 academic fields at Northview University between 1965 and 2005. The second part is redundant. It's the same thing we've seen time and time again. Summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. But we knew all that. Okay, so first things first, what is the MP core? Remember, step 1 in understanding is identifying the MP core. The line graph below, that's the subject, shows, that's the verb, the number of students enrolled in 4 academic fields at Northview University between 1965 and 2005. Okay, what is the MP core? Is it academic fields? Like 10 academic fields reduced to 12, increased to 12 academic fields? Does that make sense? I don't think so. Students, it's about the number of students, right? So when we say 12,000, it's not 12,000 academic fields, it's 12,000 students. So we've identified the MP core. Now, remember, step 2, look at the chart and identify its features. Okay, I know we have a vertical axis here, which shows the number of students, the same MP core that we identified here in the question. And we have a scale of 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and 12, right? But the key here shows me that this is in the thousands. So it's 2,000, 4,000, 6,000, 8,000, 10,000, 12,000. Remember, when I said pay attention to the key, this is what I mean. If you had failed to pay attention to this, you might have ended up writing a report that describes everything quite perfectly, except for the fact that the numbers are in the thousands. And you may have forgotten this, and this is going to affect your score. So pay a little extra attention before you jump into the task. The horizontal axis is the next part I'm going to be looking at. And as you can see, we have years, and the scale is 10 years, right? So we have 1965 to 75 to 85 to 95 to 2005. So we have a scale of 10 years. It says number of students registered at Northview University. A lot of the time, this MP that you get in the question will be repeated here above the task itself, which is what we can see here. And the MP core is students once again. And again, looking at the key, we have here the name of our 4 variables. So we have the changes in the number of students enrolled in the hard sciences, in engineering majors, in medicine, and also in arts and humanities. So 4 variables corresponding to 4 lines, each representing a different set of majors. Now, remember, the next step would be to make a sentence. Remember, randomly select a given part of the chart and describe it in simple words. I'm going to take this part of the chart. Okay, this part from 1965 to 1975 from this variable. Okay, how am I going to do that? I'll show you. It says hard science, so I know this is related to, it says engineering, so I know this is related to engineering. And, okay, so engineering, but what about engineering? Well, I know this is the number of students, so perhaps I can say the number of students who were enrolled in engineering majors. That's accurate, right? Okay, what happened to the number of students who were enrolled in engineering majors? Well, it increased from 1965 to 1975. How much did it increase? It increased from over 8,000 to over 10,000 students. Okay, let me see if I can put all of this together in a sentence. I can say the number of students enrolled in the engineering majors at Northview University increased from 1965 to 1975 from over 8,000 to just above 10,000 students. There. So you see, I stated this sentence and I tried to include as many details as possible. So did I need to mention Northview University? No, not really, because it's all in Northview University, right? So you don't necessarily need to include every contextual detail when you're stating this sentence. But this sentence makes me feel confident that I've understood the data correctly and that I'm ready to write my response. But not so fast. Remember, planning. Planning involves answering 3 questions. Number 1, how can I divide this information into 2 or 3 parts? Well, how many variables do I have? I have 4. I have hard sciences, engineering, medicine, arts, and humanities. How can I divide this information into 2 or 3 parts? I have 4 variables, so I can't write 1 paragraph for each variable, because if I do that, I'll end up with 4 paragraphs, and I can't. Remember? Because it'll probably result in a very lengthy response. So what can I do? I can bundle or group these variables together, ideally based on some kind of rationale. For example, I can see in this line graph that the number of students enrolled in hard sciences and in engineering majors has fallen from 1965 to 2005. On the other hand, the number of students enrolled in medicine and also in arts and humanities has increased. So one way I can solve this problem is by writing 1 paragraph for hard science and engineering and writing a separate paragraph for medicine, arts, and humanities. Remember, this is only one possible way of solving the problem. You could come up with another reasoning or method of classification. Let's say instead of number of students enrolled in these majors, we had the amount of chicken, lamb, beef, and fish that is consumed in a country. So our 4 variables are lamb, beef, chicken, and fish. So what I could do is I could have red meat versus white meat, right? So I could have lamb and beef described in 1 paragraph, and then chicken and fish described in another paragraph. Note that in this case, we're not looking at whether, which ones are rising, which ones are falling. We're looking at the nature of the variables to make this decision. So you need to familiarize yourself with different examples. And in each case, you need to ask yourself, how would I logically make this division? The next question is, okay, so let's say you're writing 1 paragraph for hard science and engineering and 1 paragraph for medicine and humanities. You can only afford to include 2 or 3 sentences for each of those paragraphs. In other words, I should be able to summarize everything you see here regarding hard science and engineering in 2 to 3 sentences. How am I going to do that? I'll show you. I could write 1 sentence for hard science where I say the number of students enrolled in the hard sciences decreased from over 10 to above 8,000 students, right? That's 1 sentence and it describes everything. But for engineering students, maybe I can do 2 sentences. I could say, for engineering students, although there was an initial rise from above 8 to just over 10,000 students, it subsequently declined sharply until 1985, reaching between 6,000 and 8,000 students, and finally dropping to below 6,000 students in 2005. Notice that it's a very long sentence, but it's still 1 sentence. And so altogether, I managed to put together one paragraph consisting of 3 sentences describing the hard science and engineering majors. Now, think about how you would do the same thing for medicine, arts, and humanities. If you're going to write one paragraph describing both students enrolled in medicine and those enrolled in arts and humanities, how would you summarize it in only 2 to 3 sentences? A few tips. Whenever you're dealing with interval data, like what you can see here, focus on the starting point. Focus on what happens in the end. What is the general trend? If the general trend can be summed up in 1 or 2 sentences, it's always more important than all the minor details that you may see here and there. So starting points, end points can be important to report. Another thing you should focus on is the peak and the low point. So for example, when you're describing engineering students, it might be worthy to mention how the highest number of students enrolled in engineering took place in the year 1975 with over 10,000 students enrolled in this major. As you can see, peaks and low points are important, and if you can, try to mention them in your report. Other than that, focus on the general trends, focus on what has happened to this variable over time, removing as many unnecessary details as possible. Okay, now we figured out our paragraphs. We know we're going to write 2 paragraphs, and we know how many sentences we're going to include in each. The final question that remains is vital information, key points, remember? And you need to find 2 key points. What key points can we find here? Well, number 1, for your first key point, try to come up with a general overview of what has happened to these variables. What do I mean? I'll show you. If you look at the general trends here, and you ignore any, increases or decreases that happened in between, you'll notice that we have a declining trend for hard science and engineering majors, and we have an increasing trend for medicine, arts, and humanities. So this itself can serve as a key point for your response. Your first key point can be, although there has been a decline in the number of students enrolled in hard sciences and engineering, the number of students who have chosen medicine or arts and humanities has increased over the years. As you can see, without mentioning any numbers, without mentioning any details, I'm only reporting the general observable trend, with 2 variables declining over time and 2 variables increasing over time. Notice that any change that runs contrary to that general trend is ignored. What do I mean by this? For example, in the engineering major, we have an initial rise and then a decline. But I'm not going to mention that initial rise because my focus is on the general trend. And the general trend is that overall, the number of engineering students fell in spite of those increases that happened in the middle, right? So that can be the first key point. So whenever you're dealing with interval data, try to come up with a key point that sums up the overall trend. Which ones are rising, which ones are falling, and which ones have perhaps remained the same. The next question that I want you to ask yourself as you're trying to come up with another key point is draw a comparison. Do a very quick comparison and see if there is something that is always true. I'll tell you what I mean. For example, if you look at this chart, you'll notice that the number of students enrolled in the hard sciences was always ranking first. Right? At no point in this chart, in spite of the decline that is, at no point in this chart do we have students from engineering, medicine, or arts and humanities exceeding or becoming greater in number compared to hard sciences. So hard sciences is always number one. That's important. That's a significant piece of information. They always ranked first. The same, but opposite, can be said about arts and humanities. From 1965 to 2005, every year, the number of arts and humanities students was lowest compared to the other ones. So as you can see, we have one variable that is constantly the highest and one variable that is constantly the lowest. So for your second key point, I want you to compare the variables and see if there is a meaningful difference or a meaningful similarity perhaps. I'll give you another example. Let's say we have a line graph with 4 variables of chicken, fish, beef, and lamb, right? And as we look closely at the general trends, we see that there is an increase in white meat consumption and a decrease in red meat consumption, right? That's what we've observed. People are consuming more white meat and they're consuming less and less red meat over time. But when I look closely, I see that at the beginning of the period, beef was the most consumed type of meat. And by the end, chicken, which was third to begin with, outgrew beef in consumption. What does that mean? It means one of my key points can be stated as follows. Although at the beginning of the time period, people consumed more beef than chicken, by the end of the reported period, chicken consumption had outgrown the amount of beef consumption. So while, beef consumption was greater than chicken consumption at the beginning, by the end, the people consumed more chicken than beef. So as you can see, it's a reversal. And seeing that reversal over time can be a very good key point worthy of mentioning in your report. Thank you again for watching. I hope you enjoyed this lesson. If you did, please share, like, and subscribe. I'll see you all in the next lesson.